Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about how to use Neapolitan chords in minor keys. So, first of all, let's have a think about Neapolitan chords. Neapolitan chords belong to this group of what we call chromatic chords. In other words, they lie outside the basic diatonic chords that belong to a key, but they function within that key, and we'll say more about that shortly. So, if I'm in the key of C minor, which is the key we're going to work in today for this particular example, well, here's a scale of C harmonic minor. And if I want to form the diatonic chords for the scale of C minor, well, I use that harmonic minor scale and I put a root, a third and a fifth, and I follow the key signature plus that raised seventh that we do for the harmonic minor scale. So chord 1 is C, E flat, G. Chord 2 is D, F, A flat. Chord 3 is E flat, G, B natural. Chord 4 is F, A flat, C. Chord 5 is G, B, D. Chord 6 is A flat, C, E flat. Chord 7 is B, D, F. Okay, now obviously you then get a mixture of major, minor, augmented and diminished chords. You can use the melodic minor, you can use the natural minor, but really fundamentally the Western tradition since 1600 is if you're writing harmony, then most of the time you're using the harmonic minor scale. So that's the kind of point of reference. Okay, so what's the Neapolitan chord in relation to that? Well, what we do in a minor key is we take chord 2. So chord 2 in C minor is D, F, A flat, and we lower the root. So D is at the root of that chord, it becomes D flat. So I end up with a major chord on the flattened second, D flat, F, A flat. So either flatten the second and give us a major chord, or find chord 2 in the harmonic minor scale, D, F, A flat, and then lower the bottom note. Okay? When you're doing this in a major key, you'll have a chord 2 and you'll have to lower the bottom note and the top note, the root and the fifth. But in a minor key, chord 2, in a sense, the top note's already lowered. So you just lower that bottom note to get your major chord. So that's a Neapolitan. So in the key of C minor, the Neapolitan chord is D flat, F, A flat. Neapolitan chords usually are used in first inversion. So having got that chord, then we put F in the bass and we've got a Neapolitan being used in first inversion. You don't have to use it in first inversion, but normally it is used in first inversion. Okay, so we've got two things to think about under this topic of how to use Neapolitan chords in minor keys. One is, what do I do after the Neapolitan chord? And the other is, what do I do before it? So thinking about what we do after the Neapolitan chord for a moment, Neapolitan chords are known as predominant chords. So I can have a Neapolitan chord, here it comes in its first inversion, and I follow it with chord 5. So I'm going straight from a Neapolitan to chord 5, the dominant chord. As a little variation on that, I can put another chord in between the Neapolitan and the dominant chord. I can use chord 1 in second inversion. So we have a Neapolitan chord, then we have chord 1 in second inversion, and then we have the dominant chord. Now, arguably, that's a slightly smoother progression, which is why many composers like to use it. So nothing wrong with going straight from the Neapolitan to the dominant chord. And it can be a very effective thing to do. But I also could do Neapolitan and then I can go tonic chord, second inversion, on to 5. I mean, there are other things that you can do. I mean, I can go from the Neapolitan onto a chord 4 and then to a chord 5, or a Neapolitan then onto a chord 4, then a 1 in second inversion 5. They're all possibilities. But those are the main routes out of a Neapolitan chord, the chords of resolution. Okay, having done that, we now need to think about the approach chord. So what are the most likely chords to be used before a Neapolitan? Well, you might come up with all sorts of inventive solutions, and that's great. Basically, if it works, use it. What does it sound like? If it sounds rubbish, well, it's probably best ditched. If it sounds good, you're onto something. So let's have a look at these examples that we now have in front of us to see what the most likely possibilities might be. So in this first example, I'm suggesting that we could use chord 1 as an approach chord to a Neapolitan. So here's chord 1 followed by a Neapolitan. Works perfectly well, doesn't it? And I've got nice stepwise movement in the soprano, in the alto, and in the tenor. Okay, there's a leap in the bass, but doesn't really matter because the other 3 parts are all moving very smoothly from one to the next chord. So works perfectly well to go from 1 in root position onto a Neapolitan. In example 2, I'm showing the same thing, but this time the tonic chord, chord 1, is in first inversion. Is there an advantage there? Well, it just means that the bass can go by step. Okay, let's listen to this. So here's 1 in first inversion followed by the Neapolitan. Moot point. Does it sound better than 1 in root position Neapolitan? Here it is in first inversion. Well, you can take a view on that really. I think it's a moot point, especially in a minor key. But you could use either quite happily. Okay, now in example 3, I'm starting to illustrate resolutions by using this example of going from chord 1 in second inversion to chord 5. But here we're using chord 2B as an approach. Now the first thing you might say in response to that is, well, why do you have to use 2B? So 2 in first inversion. Why not use 2 in root position? Well, I could do, but if I use 2 in root position, instead of F in the bass, then I'm going to have a D, aren't I? Well, there are a couple of things about that that are not so clever. If I use a D in the bass here, D natural followed by D flat up there, that's going to give us what we call false relations. In other words, I'd have some kind of D in one part followed by another kind of D in another part. So the change of accidental, change of octave, change of part, same note, that means we're going to have false relations. And there's another thing in a minor key. Chord 2 is a diminished chord. When you use chord 2 in root position, it just sounds a little bit ugly. The main reason for that being that you get this tritone between the bottom and the top of the triad, the chord. So it's a bit ugly. As soon as you put a diminished chord in first inversion, it sounds a heap better. So in a minor key, if you're going to use chord 2, because it's diminished, much better to use it in first inversion as a matter of course. And if you're going to use it in first inversion, following it with a Neapolitan, we get some really smooth part writing, because you notice that in this example, the alto repeats, the tenor repeats, the bass repeats, and then we've just got that semitone movement in the soprano in this case. I mean, you could organize the parts differently, but you see how we go from one to the next. So going from that 2B, all I've got to do is that one part moving a semitone to get to the Neapolitan. And then I'm going on to the 1 second inversion and then the 5. So I get this. So that makes for a nice progression all round, doesn't it? Okay, well, in example 4, I'm going to use chord 4. Now, why am I not using chord 3? Well, chord 3 as an approach is going to be a bit awkward. In a harmonic minor scale, chord 3 is an augmented chord anyway, so that's a little bit awkward. You might be better if you're going to use it in first inversion, but to have that followed by a Neapolitan doesn't work very well at all. So 3 is not a good approach chord, especially in a minor key. So best avoided really. But 4 actually works quite nicely, because can you see as I move from 4 onto the Neapolitan, I've got several notes in common. You know, look at that alto repeating, the tenor repeating, the bass repeating. So actually that's quite handy, isn't it? Because if you think about it, in chord 4, F, A flat, C, the F and the A flat are also present in the Neapolitan. So you've got 2 notes in common. So 4 followed by the Neapolitan is quite a good move. It's also a reason why the Neapolitan followed by 4 works quite well, because of the same thing really. But here I've got 4 Neapolitan and then 1 in second inversion, 5. Okay, you might notice in that Neapolitan chord that I have a double major third. That might offend some people's sensitivities, because we sometimes have guidance that we should avoid having double major thirds. Well, it's often good advice, but in the case of a Neapolitan, often you have to double a major third to deal with a chord and to avoid consecutives. And actually it's not considered such a serious offence in the case of the Neapolitan. The Neapolitan chord comes as a slight shock, it's designed to. So actually reinforcing the major third just adds another element to that. But it's a nice smooth progression, isn't it? Going from 4 to the Neapolitan, to the 1 in second inversion, to the 5. Okay, well, example number 5 is using the dominant chord as the approach chord. Now, you'd think that would be a very logical thing to do, because the dominant chord is a nice strong chord, isn't it? It throws up slight difficulties. You'll notice here, for example, it's slightly uncomfortable that this alto is going from B to D flat. Because of that slightly awkward interval, I'm trying to follow it with stepwise movement. So having had that slightly awkward one, we're coming down by step there. You'll also notice that the tenor has got this quite angular tritone between the first note and the second note. So it's interesting, when you approach from chord 5, you do have 1 or 2 little difficulties that you might not expect coming from a chord 5. But it's not surprising when you think about it, because chord 5 is based on G in this case. The Neapolitan is based on D flat. Well, there's a tritone away there. So this tritone thing is likely to present difficulties. And as I say, it's so easy to write consecutive fifths and consecutive octaves when you're dealing with Neapolitan chords, either from the approach to the Neapolitan or from the Neapolitan to the resolution. So you've always got to be mindful of that. You know, you could say, for example, well, why didn't I just have a G in the tenor there? Well, G to A flat would have given me octaves with a soprano. So you see, it's very easy to bump into trouble, isn't it, with that kind of thing. So watch out for the consecutives. But this actually sounds all right. So even though we've got those slight difficulties there, you think actually there are ways of making it work from 5, but 5 does actually make it slightly more awkward to deal with from a written point of view, although the sound of it is good if you can organize the parts well. The last example, 6, is illustrating an approach from chord 6. Okay, well, you know, this is going to work quite smoothly. Have a listen to it. Seems to go quite well, doesn't it? And one of the things that's useful, of course, is you have a common note, A flat, because A flat's at the bottom of 6, but it's the top of your Neapolitan as well. So whenever you've got a common note, it really helps the progression. So, and again, you know, it's useful. I can use the common note. I've got stepwise movement here, nothing like a big leap in the bass. Everything then flows on nicely by step, you know, a little bit of a leap there. Notice here we've got that slightly angular tritone in the tenor, but again, is sometimes about this consecutive thing. So easy to end up with consecutive. So you might well find that you've got just the odd interval that's a little bit awkward. But if you can conceal it in the middle parts, that's the best way of dealing with it. And have the other parts around it doing something more stable. So going from 6 works quite well with the common note A flat. And then even though we've got 1 or 2 issues to deal with, I think it's an okay result. As I say, you have to kind of experiment with these things. You can decorate this, of course, within essential notes. You might come up with other possible resolutions, other possible ways of approaching the chord. And of course, much depends on the style in which you write. But the thing is not to be frightened of the Neapolitan chord, because it's a great chord to use when you want to inject a little bit of a surprise, a little bit of colour, a little bit of drama. And that's where it comes from, was the need to do that in early operas in the Baroque period. That's where it comes from, when they wanted to create that little moment of drama for a word like weep or cry or die or something. So useful chord to know about, but very useful to think about in context, so you can be fairly confident about how to approach it and how to resolve it. Well, if you found that useful and you want to go a bit further with all this harmonic investigation, well, go to www.mmcourses.co.uk, and there you'll find more details of courses like our Advanced Theory course, which goes into all the chromatic chords and much else besides. You might want to do something practical with this, in which case the keyboard harmony course would help you with that. You might want to develop your ability to hear all these things more sharply. Well, the oral dictation course would help you with that. Lots of other courses to look at as well. And while you're on the page, you might just have a look on the home page at Maestros. Click on the link to Maestros, and that will tell you about all the perks that could come your way by joining our International Maestros group. Gives you discounts off our online courses, for example, and also the opportunity to join our monthly live streams, when you can mix with other like-minded musicians from all over the globe, where you can enter into a live chat, but you can ask questions, you can submit compositions that you're writing, harmony exercises, recorded performances, and I'll give you one-to-one feedback on that. And there's also quite a strong teaching element where we can really go into something in much more depth. So that may be for you, in which case do come and join us. It'll be lovely to have you with us.